All right, so now we have all of the tools to actually look at photosynthesis and the photosynthetic organism. Here in the big picture, again, three inputs, two products. The inputs are going to be carbon dioxide, water, and energy, geez, in the form of sunlight. And then the products are going to be oxygen and sugar. And you actually return some water as well. So as I said last lecture, broken up into two parts, the photo part, photo meaning light, so the light requiring part, and the synthesis part, which is also often called the light independent part. And so here, water is picked up through the roots. Carbon dioxide comes in through the air. Um, and the energy of sunlight is used in order to build up some energy, and then that's used to pull the carbon dioxide from the air in order to make sugar. So inputs, sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, outputs are oxygen and sugar. Oxygen here, which is uh, what we need to breathe, is a waste product of photosynthesis, right? And so here we need this oxygen. It's actually required for um, cellular respiration, but for this photosynthetic product, it's produced as waste. This is why when we chop down forest, we dramatically affect our ability to pull out carbon dioxide and to increase the amount of O2. And so when last, I don't know, fall, the Amazon was burning, we were actually dramatically affecting the carbon scrubbing mechanism, the natural carbon scrubbing mechanism of the earth. So we have to be vigilant against those things. Okay, so here is the balance equation. 6 carbon dioxide molecules, 12 molecules of water yield glucose, um, molecular oxygen, and then you return back a good portion of that water as well. I'll say this sugar that's produced in photosynthesis in the chloroplast, right? It is used in cellular respiration by those same plants. So this sugar will then go to the mitochondria that are in those plants, just like they will go, well, not the sugar, but pyruvate, we'll see all that, will go to the mitochondria and be used in the same cellular respiration process that we see. So one of my favorite questions to see if we're all paying attention is, you know, do plants have mitochondria because they have chloroplasts or something like that? And yes, they still use mitochondria. They just get the sugar. Instead of getting it from the food they consume, they make it themselves in the chloroplast and then use it for the same process. And then this is an overview of the photosynthesis. Again, there's a light reaction and a what used to be called the dark reaction, a light independent reaction. In the light reaction, you take the energy of sunlight and convert it to ATP and a reduced electron carrier NADPH. And then in the dark reaction, you take the ATP and NADPH, use that energy in order to fix carbon dioxide to sugar. The light reaction occurs on the surface of the thylakoid. The light independent reaction occurs in the stroma. Um, okay, and if you can articulate that and kind of say what's going on, then you have the gist of what photosynthesis um, is. So, step we're going to talk about is the photo part, which is the light dependent part. And this is where we're actually taking the energy of sunlight and converting it into ATP and NADPH. And this is the part where we produce oxygen as a waste product. And so I'm going to go through this. It seems complicated, but it isn't as long as we kind of take things step by step. And remember, you always want to follow the electrons because that's where the energy is. Okay, so here in the photo part, you have sunlight. You're going to generate ATP, and then you have some electron carriers that you're going to generate as well. I'll just go ahead. This is the overview here, but we'll look at the individual sets, steps. So in step one, the energy from sun, let me get something a little brighter, activates an electron in this antenna system. So again, what happens? Sunlight will hit chlorophyll molecule in this antenna system. An electron gets activated and it basically gets passed around to these chlorophyll systems until finally it hits a special chlorophyll. And the special chlorophyll actually is pigmented a little bit differently than all the other ones. And once that high energy electron hits that chlorophyll, it'll actually shoot it out of the antenna system. Oops, didn't want to do that. But it'll shoot it out of the antenna system into what's called the electron transport chain, right? So if sunlight activating electrons, it bounces around until it hits a special chlorophyll molecule, and that chlorophyll molecule shoots it out of the antenna system. Now, once that happens, there is a problem. Electrons are important, and this antenna system can't tolerate a loss of electrons. And so it is hungry for to restore that electron that is shot out of the antenna system. And so what it'll do is actually take a molecule of water and split it into um, hydrogens and oxygen, right? And obviously you have to have two of these in order to make this work. Um, so it takes water and it splits it to form protons and electrons. The electrons will go to the antenna system to restore the missing electron. The protons stay inside the thylakoid, and then this molecular oxygen is produced as a waste product, right? So we get the oxygen that plants produce as waste from the splitting of water to restore electrons into the antenna system once those electrons have come out. And so here we have activated those electrons, we've gotten rid of the electrons out of the antenna system, and we have created the oxygen that plants produce as waste by splitting a water molecule in order to do that. You've also created a couple of protons inside the thylakoid, and we're going to see that that proton buildup is going to be important for thylakoid action. Big deal. Lots of stuff going on. Okay, so now we have a high energy electron that's floating off someplace, and we have created the oxygen in that first step. The next thing is this high energy electron gets passed to what's called an electron transport chain. And we're going to see this again in cellular respiration. So these chains are a series of what are called proton pumps. They take the energy of that electron and pump protons against a concentration gradient from an area of low proton strength concentration to an area of high concentration, right? Now, I know y'all just did this with Dr. Handy, so we all know that um, this is an example of active transport. When you have something that's going against concentration gradient, you need energy in order to do that. And that energy comes from these electrons that we activated from the sun. So the energy of the electron takes hydrogens, they move it from an area of low concentration in the stroma to an area of high concentration inside the thylakoid. And so what we've done by doing that, or what these photosynthetic organisms have done by doing that, is build up potential energy. Remember, we talked about that last semester in the form of a concentration gradient. So they formed a proton concentration gradient across the membrane of the thylakoid, right, using the energy of these electrons. Um, so when that is done, this proton gradient, the only way these protons can get out to the stroma is if they pass through a molecule called ATP synthase. And so this ATP synthase uses the energy of the downward flow of protons from the inside of the thylakoid into the stroma in order to make ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate. And so here we have this high energy electron. The energy from that electron is used to force protons into the thylakoid. Those protons want to get out. And so the only way they can get out is through ATP synthase. And so ATP synthase charges them to make ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate as it goes back into the stroma. So this is the way in which the photosynthetic organisms use the energy of the sunlight to activate electrons and use the energy of electrons to make ATP from the proton gradient across the thylakoid membrane of, um, of the plant. Now, we still have a couple of things we need to clean up. The first is that we have an electron here. Now, this electron is of low energy, but electrons cannot just float around because they're highly valuable. So here they go through another photosystem. And in this weird quirk, this is called photosystem 1, even though it comes second in the process, but it was discovered first. And then the original, or the first photosystem is called photosystem 2. Go figure. They just want to mess with you a little bit. And so in photosystem 1, the NADPH producing system, you take this electron. Now, at this point, it's a relatively low energy, and then you reactivate it with the energy of the sun. And so you take this electron, reactivate it, it bounces around just like in photosystem 2 until it hits a chlorophyll A molecule and then it shoots out. Now, in this case, when it shoots out, instead of going to an electron transport chain, it goes to an electron carrier. And so this activated electron links up with the electron carrier NADP plus to form a reduced electron carrier NADPH. And remember, these electron carriers have a whole bunch of energy associated with them. All right. And so NADPH will carry these electrons off um, into the Calvin cycle in order to make sugars. And so here now we've generated the ATP, we've generated the NADPH, we've made molecular oxygen, and we've utilized the energy of the sun. So the photo part of photosynthesis is to use the energy of the sun to make ATP and NADPH from these charged electrons via the electron transport cycle. So get a bit complicated, but go through it a couple of times and make sure that you can articulate it in a kind of relatively um, concise way. And so here's a look at this. Um, this whole thing is called a Z scheme, and you can kind of see it looks like a Z on its side, but this is all what's going on. Sunlight comes in, you activate an electron, that electron shoots off through the electron transport chain. The energy of that electron is used to make ATP. Note that the energy of the electron goes down as it goes through the electron transport chain, and then it hits photosystem 1. It gets reactivated by more sunlight. This high energy electron then goes into an electron carrier, NADP plus, to form NADPH. It is these things, ATP and NADPH, that go on into the Calvin cycle. And so because this kind of looks like the energy of electron kind of looks like a Z, this whole thing is called a Z scheme, right? Low energy, activated by the sun, energy goes down as it goes through the electron transport chain, reactivated by the sun, energy goes down as it's captured by NAD plus to form NADPH. And then again, this whole process forms a proton gradient. In this case, this is the inside of the thylakoid, and this is the stroma, and all of this is in the chloroplast. So here, the proton gradient inside the thylakoid, it's desperate. These protons are desperate to get out. And the only way they can get out is via ATP synthase. And so ATP synthase uses the energy of that concentration gradient to make, to make ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate. Boom, and we just hit the photo part of photosynthesis. The next thing to do is simply to take this ATP and NADPH and use the energy there to make sugar from carbon dioxide. um, And so this is in the Calvin cycle. We aren't going to go through all the steps of the Calvin cycle because I'm trying to keep this under 15 minutes. I only have about 2 minutes left. But the major thing is that there are three kind of steps. There is the carbon dioxide that comes in, and it gets attached to a molecule via a process called carboxylation or carbon fixation. So this is where you actually pull a molecule of CO2 from the air and attach it to a string of carbons. And this is what takes energy. Well, this is one of the things that takes energy. The next is the reduction of that molecule. And so this reduction is adding electrons to it. So that's going to come from the NADPH because that's what's carrying the electrons, right? So first step is carboxylation. Second step is the reduction of the molecules. And then the next thing is the regeneration of the molecule so that it's available to pick up another carbon dioxide. And all of this takes a lot of energy. So here for the Calvin cycle, we take ATP, we take NADPH, we take carbon dioxide, we fix that carbon dioxide to a chain of carbons to ultimately form a sugar. This is the synthesis part of photosynthesis. So again, the carbon fixation, the enzyme ribisco is responsible for that. This is one of the most prominent proteins in the world. Um, and it fixes it to a 5 carbon structure called ribulose bisphosphate. Uh, and then using the energy of ATP and NADPH, you form half of a sugar, and then you spin some more ATP in order to remake this molecule. So there's a fixation part, the carbon fixation part, there's the sugar creation or the reduction part, and then there's the regeneration of ribulose bisphosphate so that it can pick up another one. And then these are the chemical structures of that. It's used to make glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, and that glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate ultimately becomes uh, glucose. Again, one more time, this just kind of shows the amount of energy that's needed for this. You actually need 6 carbon dioxides to make 1 sugar. That makes sense because it's 6 carbons there. And as a result, you need 12 ATP, 12 3-phosphoglycerates, 12 NADPHs, and another 6 ATP in order to simply make 1 molecule of sugar. And there we go. We have just gotten through photosynthesis. I'm a little bit over time, but I'll just stop and say from this Calvin cycle and this Calvin fixation cycle, we can get to most of our other biological macromolecules. So from this, we can get to obviously our sugars, but we can also get to our lipids, we can get to our nucleic acids, and we can get to our uh, um, amino acids as well. So this forms the foundation for biological macromolecule formation. And this process, even though it feeds the entire world, is not very efficient, right? And there's a lot of places in which we lose energy. Now, we know from the second law of thermodynamics that every chemical transformation comes with a loss of energy. But look at this. If we have 100% of the energy from sunlight, leaves are only able to capture 50% of that, just in terms of the physics. And then the structure of the plant causes you to lose even more. And then the process itself causes you to lose even more. And so at the end of the day, a plant is only able to capture 5% of the total energy of the sun that's there. And yet that's enough to feed the world and itself. And in 112, we'll get into different types of photosynthetic pathways. I won't here because I'm way over time, but there are multiple ways in which this works depending on the desire of the plant to save water and the environment that the plant is in. I will end with that, and we just finished the photosynthesis chapter. Congratulations.